3.8 billion years. Regeneration is the way life on Earth started. It's a symbiotic process that brought us to this point.
Welcome to The Regeneration Will Be Funded. This is a show about regenerative finance, exploring pathways to a life-affirming economy. I'm your host, Matthew Monahan, and today I am joined by Marc Buckley. He is the founder of ALOHAS Regenerative Foundation. Thank you, Marc, for being on the show.
It's most excellent to be here. I love your show.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thanks for reaching out and making this happen. We're just coming off of Climate Week in New York. How was the week for you?
It's like South by Southwest on steroids and whatever party drugs you could imagine. I do the United Nations COPs, the conferences of the parties, and that's really the only thing worse than New York Climate Week as far as putting thousands of events at the same time in the same space. So it's not just been a week. It's been about 2.5 weeks of pre and post meetings, the UN Summit of the Future, the General Assembly, the UN Global Compact Leaders Summit, and then 350 side events and many pop-up little things here and there. It's been a whirlwind. And the reason I say the only thing worse is the conference of the parties, the COPs, is you imagine 2 weeks, 8 to 12 hours a day, 200 country delegations and pavilions, plus the General Assembly, plus the plenaries, negotiating, discussing, all at the same time. It is overwhelming. So I'm glad to be here. I'm not overwhelmed. It's good to see all the perspectives in one place, to see what voices are emerging and what's kind of getting swept under the rug or what's not apparent. So,
got it. Well, I'd love to ask you about that, but also just noticing like you seem to be one of the most still intact humans I've come across at the end of Climate Week, and you're like, nope, I've got energy, and you've also been doing this for a long time. What powers you? What fuels you? What keeps you going?
So I have my own regenerative process. It's a daily process, so I need to make sure I sleep well, and I've been doing it 32 years. So obviously, if I was going to get burned out or something, that would have happened a long time ago, because I've done numerous of these events. I've been at every COP since COP 1, which was in Berlin, Germany. And
every COP since COP 1.
Every COP since COP 1. Yeah. Back then, Angela Merkel was the environmental minister who hosted the COP. And so it's been a long time. But the processes that I need to regenerate myself every single day. They're universal principles and things that I use. That's not a secret. It's just good sleep, good food, vitamins, good conversations, resonate and align with those frequencies that are moving in the same direction. Listen to those voices and those people who are trying to get humanity to a better future, to one for intergenerations beyond 8 generations, and weed out those conversations, those topics, the people that are taking us in the wrong direction, that are going slower in the wrong direction.
And how do you do that when it feels like, here we are surrounded by people and institutions that are taking us in the wrong direction? How do you filter?
One, it's funny. So I was one of the first 50 people who was trained by Al Gore in his ranch in Carthage, Tennessee, as a climate leader and a speaker. And so I learned a lot of the tools from the master, William McDonough, or Bill McDonough, the father of the circular economy, sustainable architect, wrote Cradle to Cradle and Upcycling. And they both gave me a lot of tools in that training, not only how to be a speaker, but how to survive and thrive at these international organizations where there's a lot of politics and things. And so for me, at an early stage, I just adopted this process of regeneration, that I feed my soul with good information and universal truths, basic first principles, good sleep, good, eat great vitamins and minerals, and those conversations feed your soul and amplify you. They give you the strength to go on. Those things that are negative, that are a limit to growth, that are hurting our progression, that are dividing us and setting up borders, those are all the fruits. You will know them by the fruits. Is basically those are things that make you feel tired. They make you feel weird and drained and exhausted. And if you really apply those things, so I can give you a couple things that I do. I think that we're in the Anthropocene of chairs. I think sitting is the new smoking. We go from sleeping to sitting on the toilet to sitting in the shower to sitting on the bus, the breakfast table, at work, whatever. And it's just a constant process of sitting. When I say the Anthropocene of chairs, there are 6 to 8 chairs per person on this earth. That's about 60 billion chairs. And a lot of our time's sedentary. Well, you have that extra energy by standing. Not only you feel a little bit more healthy, you're more alert. The telltale sign is if I'm in a boring conversation, if I have to sit at the General Assembly or at the United Nations in an event, or at the EU or the World Economic Forum, and it's boring, if they're talking something that doesn't apply, I immediately fall asleep. I start to yawn. I start to think, okay, and that's a telltale sign that we're not getting to action. We're not getting in the right direction. So simple changes that you do over time that don't feel like exercise, don't feel like work. They don't make you tired. Oh, I've got to do this. No.
Right.
It's just a change in lifestyle, and it's one that's more regenerative, that actually builds you up, gives you more energy. It's there over time. You have more seeds and more energy to harvest in the future because you're not working on your reserves. You're not draining your bucket. You're constantly in that cyclical process to build good compost, to build fertile soil, to then plant good seeds, to harvest good, and have plenty of abundance overall. And it's not just a farming analogy or metaphor. It's actually a model for business. It's a model for governance. It's a model for economics that really is the life model. And the other thing is 3.8 billion years. Regeneration is the way life on Earth started. It's a symbiotic process that brought us to this point. And there's a lot of other nuances that tie into that I think we've missed. I've heard many people say, hey, this regeneration thing sounds like a new trend. And no, it's not. It's not new. Leonardo da Vinci talked about it 500 years ago. He wrote about it. He drew about it. And it's existed for 3.8 billion years at least, maybe longer than that. Our timelines are still not quite that accurate, but yeah.
Right. Can you say any more about this word regeneration? You've been using it for quite some time, and it is more in vogue, I guess, these days in the latest wave. Yeah. How do you think about that word?
Regeneration means to create the conditions that are conducive for life to thrive and flourish amid ever-changing life conditions. And it's really also a process to make the world work for 100% of all life and humanity on this earth in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation without the ecological offense or disadvantage of anyone. That's this entire regenerative process. And that might sound like a word salad or a word soup. You're thinking, wow, that's a mouthful, but what does it mean? You can apply creating the conditions that are conducive to life to any business model, any governance model. If you're creating policies, regulation, laws, a business structure that's hierarchy or that's at a disadvantage of anyone, if it doesn't create more conditions of abundance, have super exponential growth, then you're not living regenerative. You're living a one-way model that eventually has a limit to growth, has a bubble that builds up and eventually bursts that needs to be built out, is one of division and separation of humanity and life, because we're We're using reductionism or mechanization to reduce humanity down to the lowest common denominator, to time frames and borders, encapsulating us in a siloed linear approach, which will never get us to that future that hopefully most people desire.
Right. Yeah, it seems, hearing your words and Buckminster Fuller's, frame as well, but it seems that regeneration, we have this challenge with our relationship to growth, in terms of endless economic growth and material consumption and fossil fuel growth and exponential technologies that don't always kind of address the type of world we want to live in. But yeah, what I hear from you is that regeneration is also more about the continuity, like it's the conditions for thriving of life, not necessarily, just grow something right now as fast as possible, as large as possible. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, there is. So there's this other principle of not only symbiosis and regeneration, and and when we're talking about that, we're talking about living systems. We're a living system. Biology, ecology, those are living systems, and all living systems and their subsystems.
Hmm.
1 + 1 never, ever, ever, ever will equal 2. It's always a super exponential.
Mm.
Again, word soup or word salad, you're the what the hell, super exponential. Um, it actually verges on quantum tunneling, and that's what really gets a lot of people. It's a super abundant process. When you think of, and you know this because you do farming as well, you come from that background, but in a handful of soil, there's more microbial and bacteria and organisms in one handful of soil than there are people on the earth, and probably almost verging on the number of stars, and the trillions of trillions. It's astronomical. And that's that principle that just doesn't have to do with farming or with soil.
Mm-hmm.
If we use those processes, symbiosis is an ecological phenomenon, as the world's fastest form of human evolutionary innovation that we've ever seen. And if we realize we're living organisms, we're living people, we're living systems like biology, like ecology, that when we apply those principles, we get exponential results, and we actually get this quantum tunneling. I want to say something to that, because I just got done in Asia, speaking at Asia's largest tech event, Tech Sauce. What's a tree hugger or environmentalist or economist like Marc doing at a tech event? Well, there's a lot of talk about AI. There's a lot of talk about quantum computing. So I'm going to tell you a little story that Yuval Noah Harari's told many times, but people don't know the back end of it. Blake Lemoine left Google because of Lambda AI, because he said it's going to go sentient. It's gone sentient. I don't care if it went sentient. That's not really the real topic. The real topic is human beings are at a stage now that they're sacrificing their livelihood, good incomes, insurance at the cost of technology. In the defense of technology, they're willing to sacrifice their basic needs and livelihood in the defense of something, saying that's gone sentient. But I'll tell you what, Matthew, never in human history do I know of, there's been a few people that have had the debate or conversation. Boy, I'm worried about that bumblebee going sentient and taking me over, stinging me in the ass and changing the world. Or that mycelium or that mycorrhiza or that plant that is doing photosynthesis, capturing carbon, creating oxygen and healing our soils, that's going to go sentient. But I'll tell you, they've been sentient for 3.8 billion years. So why haven't we had that conversation? More so in the Green Revolution, or the movement of the Green Revolution. It's funny because this change that humanity has gone through, we domesticated technology, or has technology domesticated us? Did we domesticate agriculture? or animal agriculture, or did it domesticate us and make us sedentary, keep us into one space to sow the soils, plant the seeds, and that? So we're asking ourselves some of these wrong questions, and that's about sentient, but that quantum revolution, that quantum theory, string theory, or quantum computing, nobody ever realizes, why do we have that? Why is quantum computing so important? Why are we struggling? Are we worried about quantum supremacy? That's the wrong question. The reason we have that is because plants, mycelium, mycorrhiza, bees, animals, they've been sentient for 3.8 billion years, and we can't figure out why that plant that is quantum mechanically is doing photosynthesis, capturing carbon, creating oxygen, and healing the soils in a quantum mechanical way. And it has done that for 3.8 billion years. So we need to get a computer, a quantum computer, to do that. And part of the problems in that process is we're taking that quantum and we're trying to put it in a box. We're taking that quantum and putting in these Google or these supercomputer box or cooling it down and putting it in this. But there's a thing called quantum nomorphic computing that actually would allow us to nudge closer to that quantum mechanical process that puts the quantum in the cloud, quantum in the stars, that we can have it be more an open system and accessible to all. To start thinking about that original, how can we mimic real life quantum mechanical processes in our businesses, in our organization, in our governance models? So when I speak at these technical conferences and they talk about AI and they talk about consciousness, or they talk about being sentient or quantum computing, let's have no mistake, the natural world has been that way a long time, and we forgot about that. The quantum string theorist said that, talks about it all the time, and many other greats do, but it's not something that in the main media is put forward or talked about a lot. And I think that's really vital.
Got it. I must admit, Mark, you lost me a little bit, but I think I got some of the gist, which is basically sentience and quantum consciousness is present in the natural world around us, and yeah, we often forget as we rush to putting things into little boxes and gadgets. And so, is your message that we're going the wrong direction by focusing so much on technology at the loss of an appreciation for the natural world? Or how do you think about, this progression of we are a tool making species, and we're going to continue to do that? Is this like we're in the birthing stages of an explosion of intelligence and consciousness, and we're going to find our way through it, or do we need to kind of pivot back into small bands of 50 to 100 people in bioregional local communities and grow our own food and simplify all of these ways of being? Or help me, I guess my questions really understand your vision for that world that works for everyone in all of life.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I exactly know what you mean, and it seems complicated. Us as humans, we're systemic. We're made up of many subsystems. We're complex. We create a lot of energy, and it's hard sometimes for us to understand that system's way of thinking, or that complexity. Give me the elevator pitch. Just give me the short version, the cliff notes. Our body has 11 systems: the nervous system, skeletal system, digestive system. Not one of those systems controls the other 10. They all work in harmony, gooey together as systems and subsystems. And but if we break a bone or we get sick, the other 10 try to compensate, to heal us, to keep us from being disabled or die. And so it's okay to embrace complexity. It's okay to embrace systems, and we don't want to use reductionism and mechanization to kind of dumb it down or take this siloed or linear approach. We want to apply systems thinking and that complexity of life to solve for the future. So The other thing is I get a lot of people, especially since we do ag, who love the natural world
Mm.
and that who are really adverse to technology and new things related to technology, um, quantum computing, AI, new processes and
Mm-hmm.
things. And so the reason I talk about those is to tell them it's related to the natural world and it's related to regeneration and how those systems have always worked for 3.8 billion years. And it's we need to make sure it's kept that way, that we use AI for good, that we use computing for good at the benefit of intergenerational humankind and development, our evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Development's another word that kind of comes in as we're sustainable development, regular development, which means how are we evolving? Are we still in the cave? Are we still
Mm-hmm.
practicing conventional agriculture, wild agriculture? What are we doing? Or are we kind of having that evolutionary process that's more in sync with that regenerative process of life, that symbiotic where things thrive and are abundant? And so that's kind of the clarity of why I bring that. There's that bigger question that you mentioned is, what does a world that works for everyone look like for you? And I don't
Mm.
say for me, I say for you because I want to know what it looks like for you. I've done a social experiment. I've asked 3,800 people on video this question over an 8-year process. What does a world that works for everyone look like for you?
Mm.
Most people begin to stutter. They start to sweat.
Mm-hmm.
They get really worried, like, they don't know. They have to think about it. They've never
Mm-hmm.
asked themselves that question. And most don't know. And out
Mm.
of those 3,800 people, why I asked it on videos, I wanted to, the initial thought or idea was I'd maybe get 25, 50 great answers, make a compilation video and have this aha moment that I could
Mm.
spread to others and kind of, okay, now we know we're all nudging on the same track. 3,800 people didn't know. There was 7 out of those people that had a similar answer, and it was similar to Buckminster Fuller's answer to that question that he played in the World Game and that he answered
Mm.
in his book, Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth. The other reason why I recorded it on video is because, believe it or not, after the first 10 people I started to ask, they're like, I don't know, can I come back to you later and give you my answer then? Or they'd
Mm.
come back to me a day or a couple hours later and say, I thought about it again. Can I give you my answer again?
Mm.
And every time, whether it was a week, a month, or a year, their answer was always different from the first answer. And
Mm.
some people did it 3 or 4 times, and every time their answer was different. And so I do one more other social experiment as I ask people to close their eyes and think of their home. I ask them, say, close your eyes, think about your home, what it looks like, what it feels like, how you feel there. And
Mm.
when that picture comes clear into your mind, open your eyes. And then I show them a picture of the earth. And I say, how many of you thought of this image when you thought of your home?
Mm.
Less than 1%, less than 0.000 of 1% actually come up with that with all the people I talk to at the different conferences. Well,
Mm.
that's a problem. It's nice that we all
Right.
design and decorate our home differently. We have a different version of what it looks like. But in reality, we're all on the same planet, which is
Mm.
governed by a bigger universal laws and things. And so that's part of that social experiment. But then I took it even further, and that's where the technology comes in. I said,
Mm.
well, GPT AI is real big. Let's ask that to Chat GPT. And I was one of the first beta users, so I used it in the earlier days. And it came back, and it was very close to our Buckminster Fuller's answer. Spot on, had a little bit more elaboration and specifics to where it should be, which is basically the answer to make the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation without the ecological offense or disadvantage of anyone. And I was like, that's amazing. That's great. I knew exactly where it came from. And I says, well, how did you get this? And how did you know this? And so fast. And they basically came back and said, because of this and this, and we've done it in international organizations because of our Buckminster Fuller, and we've been asking ourselves that question for over 70 plus years to try to come up with that answer, and this is the answer. Well, why doesn't humanity know that? Why didn't that 3,800 people know that? Did we train the technology but didn't train ourselves? Because we're the trainers of AI. So it knew the answer, but all these 3,800 people had different training, had different places where they picked that up. So that was a real interesting point.
Okay, so bringing it back to Climate Week, and here we are, and you know the many COPs you've attended and Climate Weeks. Yeah, how are we doing on that vision of spontaneous cooperation that works for everyone?
It's very difficult. So this year is COP29. It's in Baku, Azerbaijan. We're at the 29th COP. Why couldn't we have figured it out by the 10th COP? Why do we have to have now 20th, and the 30th will be in Brazil? And now we're at New York Climate Week. Interesting thing happened yesterday. I was at the UN General Assembly yesterday. Netanyahu spoke. The chair recognized him, that he was stepping up to the podium to speak. As he got to the podium, not the entire, but 3/4 of the entire General Assembly room, all the countries got up and walked out, including the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations got up and walked out as a protest to him and whatever politics behind that. It goes back to, what does a world that works for everyone? Well, apparently the world, even at the United Nations, is not all on the same page and agreeing. And that's a big, huge problem, because we have almost 200 plus country delegations, member states in the United Nations, and they're not all on the same page. And when they go to vote, earlier in this week, when they were voting on the Pact for the Future based off of the UN Summit of the Future, Russia tried to sabotage it, you may have heard, and quickly was shut down by a lot of countries. So it was nice that we kind of rallied that, and the bad actors were shut down. But it shows that we're not all on the same page. We don't all have the same vision. And more so, we're divided by countries, borders, cultures, the political interests, geopolitical interests around the world, which is really having a huge impact. And so that's why I'm at the United Nations, is try to unify that voice and to get us into intergenerational thinking. For the United Nations, I wrote the Sustainable Development Goal Manifesto. You see the pin on my shoulder. I did that as a futurist to give us a vision. What would a world look like December 31st, 2030, if we reached all the Sustainable Development Goals, so that we could kind of feel how that moment would look December 2030? Because people don't have that vision. Just like I mentioned earlier with that vision, what's our common home? It's the earth. They think about something else. They would decorate it different, do something different. And so that's why I wrote that. But as a futurist in 2019, I started the next iteration of goals that come after the Sustainable Development Goals in Songdo, Korea, with the UNFCCC, the Secretariat of the Climate Change Conference, and the country delegations of the United Nations, for a 7-day workshop there to kind of begin the process of what the next goal should be after that. My hope was that it would be the regenerative development goals, but it turned out that the UN, under the Adaptation and Mitigation Office that's sponsored through the UNFCCC, this workshop, a moonshot workshop to get us there, they were in this adaptation, mitigation, resilience guide. So it settled on the Resilience Frontiers program and the Resilience Development Goals. But I'm still hoping that we will leapfrog to that regenerative process. And that's, we need to think into the future. We need to have that vision of what our world that works for everyone looks like, and get that there, but with better structures, so we can have that super exponential growth, that quantum tunneling to get us there in short order, with economics, with monies, with the firm things and actions that we need to do to get there, and that understanding.
Nice. Well, you just brought up economics money. I know you've been a student of ecological economics for some time. As you know, we're in this inquiry about how to, basically reform and change our economy to be in harmony with life. So, can you share more about your work in that area and your thinking?
I'd love to. I really was blessed because I studied with Herman Daly. He was the second father of ecological economics at the University of Maryland. So not just Bill McDonough, not just Herman Daly, not just Fritz Capra of the Capra courses in system science, not just Al Gore, but these mentors, these leaders who really are pushing the boundaries of regeneration, of systems thinking, and the progression forward. Herman Daly was at the World Bank. He was an economist working at the World Bank in this international space of the United Nations. And he left in an open letter in the New York Times saying capitalism is bad. We're going in the wrong direction. We need to stop growth. We need degrowth. And he wrote several academic books. And after this open letter, started to teach at the University of Maryland. And luckily, I was able to get in and study and learn from him. Most people, again, would say, ecological economics, never heard of it. What is it? I know for a fact that you could name 5 ecological economic models. And I say this in most of my talks and presentations. And funny, most people don't speak out and say, yeah, I do know. But let me just give you an example. Circular economy, donut economics, feminist economics, Buddhist economics, well-being economics, post-growth economics, planetary boundary economics. The sustainable development goals are an ecological economic model. There's regenerative economics, and I could go on. There's more than 32.
Wow.
The difference between them and a regular economic model, so classical, neoclassical, micro, macro, capitalism, GDP, growth economics, extractive economics, those classical models, those all compete against each other. They also have a limit to growth. They get to a point where there's a bubble, the bubble bursts, or right before it bursts, it gets a bailout, and they go right back to that system that didn't work. That's a definition of insanity. Difference with ecological economic models is you can do all of them. You can do one or you can do all of them, and they give each other redundancy and they give each other support so that they actually can go on for a long time. So a lot of successes with donut economics and circular economics out there. No really big city scale success stories, but there's a lot of things going on. Right now, the Club of Rome, Sandrine Dixon, and many of those involved in the Club of Rome just came out with a new book called Earth for All. In that book, Earth for All, very short toilet read book, they use 6 different models that are ecological economic models, all wrapped into one. Planetary boundaries, the Club of Rome World Model 3 that has been updated to get all the calculations of where we need to go in the future. Donut economics, post-growth, and well-being economics, and maybe another circular economics that I'm leaving out, all in one, and it really works good. It's seeing a lot of traction. They're doing a lot of reports on that, and a lot of people are moving in that direction. Also seeing economics in a different light. When we talk about sustainability, or the 3 principles of sustainability, the core 3 principles are not the triple bottom line that John Elkington came up with, people, planet, profit, but it's economics, innovation, and the futures. And why would economics have anything to do with sustainability? Well, it's because of not regular economics, it's about ecological economics. The way life works and all the basics of how life works is based off of economics. And ecological economics is the top pillar, which will sustain our world, but also move us into a more regenerative world. The second is innovation, is because never in human history have we ever transformed from one epoch or era to another, from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age to the Industrial Age or whatever age, without some form of innovation. The pneumatic tire, the steam engine, the printing press, the computing power, the microprocessors, chips, whatever it is, quantum computing, without some form of innovation. And so I'm not talking about the new delivery app or the new dating app. I'm talking about impact innovations that transform humanity, solve human suffering, and solve our global grand challenges. AI for good, computing, quantum computing for good, that we use it in the proper way, not just to make a buck or to support capitalism, but to support life on Earth and life maybe interplanetary, but to support us to go in the right direction to these regenerative processes that I explained earlier are quantum mechanically. And the last is the futures, and that's the question: what does a world that works for everyone look like for you? Well, that's a futures question. You have to know what that vision is of where we want to go or how we want to evolve to create a roadmap or a plan to get there. And that's a really big key factor that why futures are involved. Everything we're doing today, what we're doing today, this podcast isn't being broadcast live, but it's talking about the future, where we want to go. What is that regenerative, desirable futures for all humanity? And how do we build that through architecture, landscape, engineering, science, innovation to get there, and to do it in a way that helps and is good for all life on Earth.
Marc, you're so well read. You're so well traveled. You have so much vitality. It's an inspiration. I'm curious if you could share more about Inside Ideas. You host a podcast, and you've been doing a number of these interviews, as you alluded to.
I'm going to let you behind the scenes on this. I think I told you once when we initially spoke, it was for kind of my personal reasons. I'm an avid reader. I'm addicted to books and to reading and to studying. And but it's a specific type of thing, information and books that I look at and read as well. And I, for numerous years, was always looking for not just the materials in this great reading, but for people to talk about the materials that are in this book, those learnings, the wisdoms, and the things I was reading. I couldn't believe them. I couldn't believe why the world wasn't different. And hasn't everybody read this? And what do they feel about that? And there was these aha moments. And I looked in family, in friends, in colleagues for the answers. I looked to them, say, hey, have you read this book? Have you read Yuval's book, 21 Questions? Have you read Jeremy Lentz, The Web of Meaning? Have you read Daniel Christian Wall's Designing Regenerative Cultures? Have you read Giles Hutchins' book, Nature Works, or Leading by Nature, things like that? And nobody, absolutely nobody, could do that. Mostly what happened, and this goes back to my regenerative processes, people say, oh, I have that book, but I've only made it through a couple of pages and then I fall asleep, because most people read in bed. So they're training themselves that vital, good information is putting them to sleep. So they don't have that retention. They're reading in bed. It's okay if you want to do reading, but then don't read something that's vital for your life and can help you forward. Or others had read the book, but didn't retain the information. They said, that was in that book. I didn't even know that. So I started the podcast when my very first podcast, John P. Strzelecki, he wrote The Big Five for Life, which talks about purpose for existing and the museum day moments. And he's a good friend of mine and had a fabulous podcast, but it was more for me to ask questions about his book and who had really practically applied those things. It went so well. It was a long format. And so I decided to turn it into a podcast. It was also closely after the beginning of the pandemic. So I just went through and I just went directly to the authors and asked them these hard questions. And in every one of the podcasts, that's also where I ask, what does a world that works for everyone look like for you? And the burning question, WTF, what's the futures? Things like that where they would answer that, as well as the things that I learned in their books. If I do podcasts, I have to read the book. I have to really like it and gain some kind of wisdom out of that I think humanity could use. And then I've tried to present that to people as well so that they could have the Cliff Note version, or maybe a tickling, maybe I can say something there that would inspire them to then read the book or apply it or do something else. And it just took off. But it was the immense learning, you said well read and can remember things. A lot of it came from that, and also making the friendships and speaking with these wonderful leaders. And then with that system science learning that I got from Fritz Hof Capra, just putting those things together and seeing how a lot of those relationships overlap. A lot of, the Jeremy Lentz, Fritz Hof Capras and Daniel Christian Wall and all those, they all know the same web.
Right.
So that I do, and even more. And so it's a really interesting process. So I've gained out a lot of it, but I've also heard a lot of good feedback from people. And it's actually what led me to your work as well. I didn't just say it. I am a big fan of everybody you've had on and the way your format is. And I'm so glad you're doing this, because I know what you're saying, the regeneration will be funded, and the voices you have on play such a vital part. That's kind of behind the scenes how it evolved.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And another thing we have in common is our mutual love and interest in regenerative agriculture. Can you share more about your work in that field?
I can. So I came into it from my family. My family, and on the German side, my father's American, my mother was German, my grandfather was German, my grandmother was Austrian. I come from Germany's largest organic farmers. So there's 20 farms in Europe, 15 in Germany, and I'm the sixth generation. I inherited it from my grandfather. And so I started out with old Rudolf Steiner biodynamic organic agriculture processes, and learned that from my family, but also those principles of symbiosis, of regeneration, of good agriculture and connection to nature, good soil and practices without chemicals, pesticides, and fertilizers. And then also thought it a little bit further. I studied with Jeff Lawton and Bill Mollison, permaculture design, and just had the fabulous opportunity to keep taking these baby steps, these micro steps towards a better way of living and being. And that led me to, why am I not doing regenerative ag? Why are we not using better processes in packaging and production and how we produce our food? And this is, our food systems are so messed up. And so I have to really interject, that's how I came to agriculture. That's how I came to regenerative farming. But I'm also a global food systems reformist. And the reason I am is because I believe we need to transition to those regenerative practices. But more so than that, our food systems are broken. They're very industrialized. There's a lot of issues with them. And one of the biggest things that I see in our food systems that could change is we need to get all food out of the commodities industry, out of commodities markets. We are putting food into commodities. All our food is in the commodity of fruits, vegetables, wheats, grains, everything you could think of. And when you put something in the commodities, people who don't know how to produce food, whether it's industrial or organic or regenerative, are trading our food as an investment, a stockbroker, like a gambling with our food. And all they care about is, how can we buy it low and sell it high? They don't care how it's produced. They don't care what fair wages are paid. They don't care how we treat our soils. None of that. They only care about that. When you cheapen food, you cheapen life. And therefore, that's the biggest thing. We need to get all food out of the commodities market, start valuing it, putting it into a system, because it's the basic necessity of life. It's the way cities were built, communities. We need to go back to the bioregional. We need to make these small places of vitality that can self-sustain themselves through practice of regeneration. And then as they have abundance, and that abundance, they can then deliver it to the rest of the world after they first have a stable economy and food system themselves. And that gives so much more to the world. And so I hate to go off, but it's a big aspect.
Totally.
It falls into economics, but it really falls into how we produce and do anything. If it's not, you've heard regenerative, and everybody says always ag, but it's regenerative health, it's regenerative economics, it's regenerative business models. There are so many regenerative models, and it's applicable all over because it's creating those conditions that are conducive to life.
Yeah, so well said. Yeah, I feel like the reinvention of the food system and our economic systems are so complementary and mirroring, and it could be kind of the gateway into a lot of the fundamental re-architecture that we need in terms of that relocalization and that resilience and that essentially kind of reconciliation between local versus global and trade and everything else.
Absolutely. It plays such a vital part. And a few years ago, they had the UN Food System Summit. I was part of that, and I sit on the Global Innovation Hub for Food and Nutrition and a lot of boards on agriculture and food. Specifically for that, I believe we need to reform our food systems. We need to bring more regenerative and organic regenerative practices into the entire process. There's one last thing, if you don't mind, I would like to kind of tickle upon that ties into that. We have these civilization frameworks throughout our world. And what I mean by civilization frameworks, these models of how civilizations work. There was this great study, it's called the Handy Study that NASA did. It did it twice. It did it once in 2014 and 2018 again. And it basically asked a couple questions. How many civilization frameworks have there been in our world before? What model were they using for these civilization frameworks? What structure or model were they using? Why did they collapse? When did they collapse? And a few other questions like that. So the first study came back and said, well, there's about 72 civilization frameworks out there, but out of those 72, there's really just a core tree of 32 civilization frameworks. Early antiquity, Mesopotamia, Incas, Aztecs, Mayas, Greeks, Romans, on, ancient China, ancient Persia, were the core. All of them, except for 5, collapsed because of an ecological or environmental collapse. Basically, the answer to that is food, water, sanitation, infrastructure, the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that pyramid: breathing, food, water, sex, homeostasis, excretion. Those were the reasons it collapsed. Something was wrong there. And the 5 others that collapsed because of displacement, disruption, or disease. But all 32 collapsed because they were running, not maybe because, they were all collapsed running the same exact civilization framework model. And that's a hierarchy model. Ruler, king, emperor, priest, king at the top, president at the top, and then at the bottom, peasants, slaves, laborers, and farmers at the bottom holding up that pyramid. That hierarchy model is a structure that will always fail. It always leads to collapse. But the most interesting thing that we have to take a little bit further, and we're not 100% sure about it. Daniel Schmachtenberg kind of talks about it in sense making and some other things as well. But we believe that those peasants, slaves, and laborers were holding up the bottom of this pyramid, and somehow in the process of the building up of that civilization framework, some things came in that led to the collapse built into the system. And the reason we believe that is because it's proven that none of those peasants, slaves, laborers, and farmers at the base of those pyramids, of those 32 civilization frameworks, were indigenous. They were all enslaved or taken from other countries, other cultures, to build up the Greeks, the Romans, the ancient Persia, ancient China, Mesopotamia, Incas. None of them were indigenous part of, say, hey, let's build up a new civilization framework. they all use that hierarchy model. And because they didn't have buy-in to the system, they knew they would never not be a slave, peasant, or farmer. They knew they would never have ownership and be able to live there. And they knew that they missed their family. Maybe they wanted to go back. That somehow, because that buy-in wasn't there, they didn't feel ownership of that civilization framework, that it leads to collapse. And that's an interesting thing to learn about how we live and about the processes of regeneration. If we use regeneration in a model, it's a model that has a framework and a system that is abundant. It's quantum mechanical. It's symbiotic, and it goes in. It's applicable to everything.
Right. Yeah. Well, inspiring words, or maybe words of caution, depending on how you look at it. Any final messages, Marc, that you would like to share? Appreciate your time today.
My foundation is called the ALOHAS Regenerative Foundation. The biggest comment I get kind of is, "Oh, aloha," the Hawaiian greeting, and so I have somebody who lives in Hawaii. ALOHAS is a persona or a sinus milieu from the Sinus Institute in Zurich. ALOHA stands as an acronym, stands for Adaptive Lifestyle of Health and Sustainability. And it's a regenerative foundation because we want to do transformational impact innovations for purpose that solve human suffering and our global grand challenges, change our economic systems, unify humanity to not be divided by countries, nations, or borders, but bring us together to resonate with that frequency so that we can amplify all humanity and all life on Earth to a new way of living, that evolution of regenerative futures. And I really hope that we can have millions of similar people around the world doing the work you do to regenerate our Earth. And when you say in your subline, the regeneration will be funded, I truly believe that, and I'm on board. And I thank you for your work.
Great. How do people dive in and learn more about the projects you're involved with and listen to the podcast?
ALOHAS.bio is my website for the ALOHAS Regenerative Foundation, or you could just type in Marc Earth on Google or anywhere, and you can find out about the things I'm doing. I'm pretty much at every international event. I love people and humanity, so I'm willing to speak to anybody, and I belong to a lot of other groups as well in that, so it shouldn't be that hard. And we'll promote your podcast as well as many other things to make sure that we get the word out there.
Yeah, we're all on the journey together. Thank you so much, Marc Buckley.
Thank you, Matthew. Appreciate it.
Great. And for more conversations from us, just go to maearth.com. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one.